Good morning, this is Nick Augustine here with Bruce Isaacks, and today we're here to talk about criminal defense and family law when those two come together, and we're going to start talking about family violence cases and some of the charges that can come up with family violence. So Bruce, what should people be aware of as we go into the holiday and Christmas where, when things seem to hit the fan, they happen around this time of year?
Well, Nick, people ought to be aware that during the Christmas holidays, there are often times where there's a lot of stress going on. Some families aren't real lovey-dovey, and sometimes they feel like they're forced to come together for the holidays. Then things can get out of control in a hurry, especially if there's any drinking going on.
Yeah.
We have family violence laws in Texas for a very good reason. Family violence can be very serious offenses. I mean, there are literally women who are hurt and beaten on a regular basis, and that's why we have family violence laws. But like everything else, when there's a need and we get a lot of laws, sometimes the pendulum swings too far, and that's what's going on with family violence cases.
All right. So family violence is different from, there's family violence and then there's domestic violence, and one is in the family code and one is in the criminal code. And when we talk about the family law attorneys and the criminal law attorneys, there's often a time when the two need to work together when one of these things happens, when it's during a divorce or a custody case.
They do overlap, and I have a lot of cases where, one of the defendant may actually be in the process of the divorce, and oftentimes their family law attorney will hire our office to defend them on the criminal side of the case, because they do intertwine with each other, and they can affect a lot of stuff, including custody of children, property division settlement, and the right to possess and use firearms. So there are a lot of consequences.
So when we have, the gun thing, that's another thing where we don't know, we're not allowed to carry a gun. Well, if we have a family violence conviction.
You're not necessarily, you don't even have to be convicted to not be allowed to have a firearm. In the state of Texas, we have, convictions where people do jail time, and then we have convictions where people do probation as long as they follow the rules. They don't have to do any jail time, Nick. But in Texas, we also have another type of probation called deferred probation. And when you get deferred probation in Texas, you are not convicted. You will never be convicted as long as you can follow the rules of the terms and conditions of your probation. However, even a deferred probation is considered to be a conviction for purposes of the possession and use of firearms. And that's true both under state law and under federal law. There are a lot, I've seen criminal lawyers who are not aware that if they get their client deferred probation on family violence, that person is at that point prohibited from possessing a firearm or ammunition. In Texas, the ban is for 5 years under Texas state law from the time that they get either out of jail or off of probation. However, there's a federal felony statute. If you get deferred probation for a family violence offense in the state of Texas, you are prohibited under federal law for the rest of your natural lifetime from possessing a firearm or possessing even a single .22 bullet. It is a federal felony crime.
Wow.
Lots of people are not aware of that.
Wow. So
that's why it's important to hire yourself a good lawyer if you get accused of family violence.
Yikes. So those probation options that are there, how easy is it to comply with those versus how easy is it to break those and break them sort of inadvertently?
I always tell my clients, when you're on probation, you're really just being required to do the things you're supposed to do anyway, every day. But, to some extent that's true, but to some extent it's not, because you have to do, for family violence cases, you have to take a batterer's intervention program as a term and condition probation. And that program can last 3 times a week for 24 months. Sometimes it's 3 times a week for 27 months. That's a huge time commitment for somebody to go to. They also have to do community service. They're going to have to do a lot of drug testing, perform community. So there's a lot of things you got to do while you're on probation. But family violence probably has more strenuous restrictions than anything other than perhaps a sex offender case.
There you go. So with everything that is coming up with the holidays, we have to be careful. Any tips for someone who is maybe going through a divorce or a difficult time this year? I mean, you can't hide yourself away in a closet. You still have to go through and see people and do things. There may be people out there who are trying to get your goat and get you upset. I mean, it's a bad time if people are going through rough things in their family during this time of year.
It is. I would recommend to anybody who is actually in the process of going through a divorce just to abstain from the use of alcohol during the holiday periods.
Right.
Because you don't want to get in a situation where your ex-wife or soon-to-be ex-wife or your ex-husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, is a button puncher, and they intentionally show up late for an hour and a half just to try to see you off. Because they know that if they can get you arrested during the divorce, the property division is going to drastically change. It's not going to be 50-50 any longer. Mm-hmm. And there are people who are actually coached by their attorneys to draw their soon-to-be ex into a fight.
So that happens just as easily as posting a picture with certain people, and it doesn't have to be the new boyfriend, girlfriend, paramour, or anything. It could be someone else's that those are my friends, and she's with my friends.
Yep.
Little things like that, and that person gonna stew on it. Someone else comments. Someone else doesn't know there's a divorce. And they ask, "Where's Harry tonight?" Oh, Harry's at home and he's pissed now.
Well, that's what I'm saying. People in that situation, they just need to stay away from alcohol during the holiday season. That deal. I've never been divorced, but that situation happened to me. I was at a friend's funeral one time, and I asked that man, son, "Well, hey, where's your wife?" And the guy goes, "Oh, you mean my ex-wife?" I didn't know they were divorced.
Yeah. All right. Well, Bruce needs to check Facebook more often.
Yeah.
Bruce, we talked about in our first segment family violence, and families are topical this time of year.
Right.
And one of the things when people push too far and cross the line, protective orders sometimes get involved. And so if you have a family law attorney, their family law attorney may also want to talk to a criminal attorney about protective orders, and especially if the protective order is violated. So tell us a little bit about protective orders and how your role as a criminal defense attorney dovetails with the people in family law.
Well, we need to keep in mind, Nick, that there are several different types of protective orders. Mm-hmm. The type of protective order most people think about are the type when somebody's getting a divorce and their attorney goes down to a district court and files a petition for a protective order. But you can also have a protective order issued against you if the district attorney's office files that petition in state court. And then the other kind of protective order that a lot of people get that people aren't aware of, if you get arrested and accused for assault family violence, even if the injured party does not want a protective order, the police officer has the authority in Texas on his own to ask the judge or the magistrate at the arraignment to sit what's called an emergency protective order. And if neither the victim or the police officer asks for that, the magistrate has the authority to issue an emergency protective order on their own. And it is effective immediately. There's no right to a hearing. There's no way to fight it. It just usually goes into place for a set number of days. Generally at 61 days, it can be as long as 90 days.
Wow. That I bet most people don't know that.
Well, they don't know that, and when people leave, they get handed, it's kind of like buying a car. You sign a whole bunch of papers, you don't really read it and know what it is.
Right.
And those emergency protective orders are like that. That's one of the many documents you sign to get released, and sometimes people sign that thing and they don't realize that they're now under an emergency protective order.
It's a scary thing because if you break that and violate the protective order, you're not going to have a good Christmas, not a fun time.
No, you're not. You're going to go to jail.
Right. So what are the normal restrictions we see in those, and what happens when someone violates it? What happens?
On that type of protective order, the normal restrictions are don't go within a set number of feet of the injured party's school, the injured party's residence, the injured party's place of business. That's what we often see. And they always say do not contact the individual by phone or fax or text message, but those are usually restricted to in a threatening manner type conversation. But you just can't show up at their work or home for any reason during that period of that protective order.
Well, and so the thing that I always find interesting is that if the other person has a protective order on you, you don't know necessarily where they are. So what happens if you are somewhere, and I mean, look here, we're in Denton, you could be at the square and going to one place and the other person's going to another place.
That happens all the time.
What do you do?
I tell my guys, turn around and walk the other direction. Don't talk to them, don't make eye contact with them, just turn and leave.
What if the other one chases after you, going Facebook Live saying, I'm going to call the police, you're threatening me, you're scaring me. You don't know, it's like, well, she just walked up to me and went all crazy with her phone, and she said, oh, he did this. He said, she said, but
Sometimes
what people
that
see
happens.
is, what is on the feed or what's recorded.
Sometimes that happens, and generally in that kind of situation, if you can see the person who the restraining order is against, if they're clearly trying to leave and get themselves out of the situation, somebody at the DA's office or the police department can have enough sense to realize that's what's going on.
Right. Hopefully. Like we said, absolutely this is something that can affect our work. Trying to get a job. What do you tell people who say, I'm facing a potential charge here? What's my long-term effects of these things? And we'll talk about multiple offenses as well, another deal, but...
It kind of depends, well, regardless of what you do for a living, if you've been charged with or convicted of an assaultive offense, especially family violence, you're going to have a tough time renting an apartment at any decent apartment complex. You're going to have a tough time getting past the human resources department at the company you're applying for a job for. And there are a lot of occupations where you can lose your license if you get convicted of a family violence, like doctors, nurses, stockbrokers. There are a lot of licensing people that are going to have licensing problems if they get convicted of something like that.
Wow.
But getting back to protective orders, what we talked about were just the short-term emergency protective orders. The other kind of protective orders are the ones that either the DA can get or a family law attorney can get. They can last up to 2 years. And depending on what kind of violation you can have a 6-month, $4,000 fine, or you can get up to 2 years of state jail and a $10,000 fine for violating a protective order. So it's not anything you want to be messing around with.
If I get a protective order that's potentially going to be, on me, how do I get rid of it? What's my best case scenario?
It's most likely you're not going to get rid of it until it expires by operation of law. We have had some success with the emergency protective orders of getting the complainant to meet with us, the victim to meet with us and say that they now changed their mind and they no longer want to have that protection. And we have them sign an affidavit. We'll go down and talk with the judge. Sometimes you get the DA to agree to it. Oftentimes you just go back to the issuing magistrate and they will remove the protective order if they think it's in the best interest of the protected person.
Absolutely. Any final thoughts on protective orders and the holidays?
Stay away from booze and don't violate those protective orders or you're going to go to jail.
All right, you don't want to go to jail. So Bruce, another problem with family law and criminal law, how they intersect, is when someone is charged with other crimes and violations while they are going through a divorce, family law, or custody case.
Right.
Such as, example, getting a DWI when you have a open custody case. Yeah. Bad time for that.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I was involved last year with a case where a very vindictive woman, it was actually, the divorce was over, but it was during a custody issue, actually hired a private detective and had the private detective follow the ex literally for weeks at a time until they could figure out where that individual would go to drink alcohol. And the private investigator worked with a area police department and was in contact with them several times a day before they pulled the guy over, stopped him, and arrested him. And the only reason that was going on was so that she could gain an upper hand in a custody issue.
Yeah.
And that deal backfired on that woman. Even they had good legal counsel, everything was able to work out. But a more simplified thing that I normally see is either the mother or the father of the child, they may get arrested for driving while intoxicated during the pendency of a divorce. And when that happens, the other party is always going to go back down to the district court where the divorce is pending and either ask the judge to not let them see the child anymore, or if they're going to let them see them with supervised visits only, or at the very least, to put an ignition interlock device or a scram monitoring device on that person's body before they're allowed to have that child, so we can make sure they're not drinking.
Wow.
And that's very expensive.
That's a lot to deal with.
It is.
It is a lot to deal with. You know what else is very expensive? Not having the other parent working when it comes time for child support.
Yeah.
So that's the one thing that I always think is funny when people are saying, well, I'm going to bust his ass, and now, but you also want child support, and now the guy's in jail. So
right.
That's not going to happen.
Not going to be child support while they're in jail.
Right. So DWIs can, affecting your ability to go see your kids, having custody. It all depends on your district court judge and your family court, of course. But there are going to be a lot of other things. What other types of things can get involved in a divorce case where you can maybe have embezzlement charges, fraud things, funny dealings with things. We never know. In the divorce world, you never know what's going on with things until you start diving into it.
Yeah, a lot of these divorces, there's really not enough assets in the marital estate to be fighting over, but that's not always true. But swinging back to DWI for a little bit, a lot of people don't realize if you get, like, when you have your weekend visitation with your child, if you get arrested for driving while intoxicated and you have a child in the car with you that's under the age of 15, that misdemeanor just went to a felony. And that, I guarantee you, is going to complicate your visitation arrangements.
Absolutely. Any other common criminal charges besides DWIs that we see sometimes in family law?
So mainly accusations of assault, family violence. A lot of times they will make accusations about, possible child abuse, physical child abuse, or the really ugly divorces, they'll make an allegation of sexual abuse of that child.
Yeah.
I see a lot of that. I get a lot of referrals from family law lawyers where their client is suddenly out of the blue being accused of, sexual inappropriate behavior with that child.
Yeah, that begs the question in my little head about civil, liability for defamation. When you get a per se, accusation of a criminal offense there, you can get in, if the web starts just going all over the place.
Unless this is a large marital estate, by the time they get through fighting out in court, there's not going to be a lot of money left over to pay for a civil judgment.
Right, exactly. So it's really important to, if you've got that, let's say someone does have a potential DWI charge and all that, and they think, well, I'm going to handle this on my own, and I'm going to take the standard deal I've looked up. And
you never want to do that, Dick. And the reason you don't want to do that is DWI is one of those offenses that it's like a building block.
Yeah.
The first DWI generally is a Class B misdemeanor where you're looking at 72 hours in jail up to 180 days in jail and or a fine of $0 up to $2,000. The exception to that is if you have a blood test of 0.15 or higher, it can be a Class A. But a second DWI conviction is going to be a Class A misdemeanor. It doesn't matter whether your first conviction was when you were 18 years old and you're now 48. The second one's going to be a Class A. And the range of punishment for Class A misdemeanor DWI is 30 days in the county jail, minimum, up to a maximum of 365 days in jail, and a fine and or a fine of $0 to $4,000. 15, 20 years down the road, if you pick up DWI number 3, now we're talking about going to prison. That's a felony, 2 to 10 years in prison, and a fine not to exceed $10,000. And that doesn't even begin to look at the expenses of your driver's license being suspended, because it will be. On a DWI, typically, except for the first DWI, there's always going to be a suspension when you get arrested, and there's going to be a second suspension if you get convicted. And that includes even if you get probation. The only exception is on the first DWI. But that still has one suspension.
So, if you're up against this, you need to know what you're doing, and you need to hire a good lawyer and look at, go ahead.
DWI charges and family violence charges are something you never, ever want to represent yourself on because of the long-term consequences. The family violence is the same way. Those are building block offenses too. You get one, the next one's going to be enhanced. Just like a DWI, except the penalties are even higher.
All right, good information to know.
And they don't tell you that, when you go down there and say, hey, I'm going to waive a lawyer, I just want to talk to the prosecutor and work out probation. They don't tell you all that.
Well, and the thing, the money that people think they're going to save, and well, I looked this up, and I don't need to do this. And the worst advice is that what you find online or from people who are not lawyers who don't really know, and they say, just to take the regular deal they offer, do this, do that, you're going to be fine.
Never want to do that.
Right, because you just don't know, and plus we don't know what type of changes there might be in the law in the future.
That's right.
So you don't want to have that on your books.
Exactly.
That's right. All right. Bruce, one of the other things that comes up in family law cases that intersects or can unfortunately intersect with criminal law and defense is the use of some of the tracking devices, whether it be the baby monitors, key logs on a computer, tracking a car, smart TVs, all these different things that technology has brought us that are good tools for good, but they can be used for bad as well.
Nowadays, it's fairly easy for just about anybody, Nick, to get on the internet and order a GPS tracking device to install a car, or something that looks like a teddy bear that, you know, sits on the shelf in some kid's bedroom, you know, that's really a recording device. If you're the mom and dad, you can use those kind of devices. If you're trying, when I mean like a teddy bear, if you're hiring a babysitter or a nanny and you want to keep it on them, that's perfectly legal. Where you get into trouble is when you start putting those kind of devices in your ex-wife's house, or you put that device on your ex-wife or on your ex-girlfriend or current girlfriend's motor vehicle without that permission. Those kind of things trigger state criminal offenses as well as federal criminal offenses. You just don't want to be doing that stuff. So I tell people, unless it's your teenager and you own that car, not to use those kind of devices. It's okay to use the devices if you're keeping an eye on your nanny because it's in your home. You have a right to do that. But don't be spying on ex-wives, current wives, because you're going to get yourself in a lot of trouble. It'd be cheaper to hire a private investigator if you want to get dirt on somebody like that.
Well, and I think that's why some people will take the easy route to get information, thinking they're going to be helping their lawyer, and all of a sudden they're facing some criminal liability for breaking a law they didn't intend to break.
Shortcuts are often not the best way to go, and they're never the cheapest route to go.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts on wiretaps and tracking things like that?
Don't be doing it. Don't be doing it.
Don't do it.
Unless you're a police officer and you have a district judge signature, don't be doing that.
Right. What about when people say recording phone calls, where they say, "Well, I heard that Texas was a one-party consent state."
It is. You can record a phone call as long as one party knows about it. Mm-hmm. There are a few exceptions, like attorneys are not allowed to record their clients' phone calls. There are some exceptions like that, but I have a lot of cases. Generally, there'll be some type of allegation involving inappropriate sexual contact with an adult or child. It occurred many years ago, and there's no physical evidence at this point in time. Mm-hmm. A lot of times, the police will do a scripted phone call where they'll have the victim call the alleged perpetrator, saying, "Hey, I'm in counseling now. It's been a long time. I'm trying to get past this." And they try to get them to talk about it, so they'll make admissions. And those admissions, those are legal, as long as one of the people knows the police recording. I have those cases happen all the time.
Man, you know what? When you leave the house, assume that everyone's wearing a microphone, a wire, speaking to the flower man.
Yeah.
It's a crazy world out there. So just just be careful. It's like you were saying earlier that a lot of the crimes that we wouldn't have any crime if it didn't have for like relationships. Like what was that? Booze, women,
and money.
And booze, women, and money.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, but when I have somebody come in on one of those old allegations of all kind of inappropriate sexual behavior, one of my screening questions now is, have you heard from that individual recently?
Yeah.
And most of the time they have. Well, yeah, they called me out of the blue the other day. They're in counseling, so I know we're in trouble at that point.
Mm-hmm. Wow. All right. Well, you know what? So it's just avoid all the vices.
Yeah.
And you can have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year's. Keep your butt out of jail, and then you don't have to hire Bruce. But if you do get in trouble and get in hot water, call Bruce Isaacks.
I'll take care of it.
All right. Thank you all, and for all of you listening to this podcast, appreciate you sharing it with other people on your feed. Hit that share and the like button, because you just never know whose kid just done messed up this weekend.
Yep.
Yeah. All right.
Whose kid or whose spouse.
You never know. All right. Thank you all.
Thanks, Nick.